Hey, come on in. Get yourself comfortable. Pull the blanket up, find your spot, and settle in, because tonight we're going somewhere a little darker than usual. If this is your first time here, welcome. I am really glad you found this channel. And if you've been here before, you already know how this goes. Lights low, volume up, and let the night do what it does. Before we get started, if you enjoy what we do here, the slow burns, the real feeling stories, the kind of dread that follows you into the morning, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps more than you'd think. Drop a comment too, even if it's just to say you're listening. There's something I've always liked about knowing people are out there in the dark with me, going through these stories together. We've got a long one tonight, so I want you to pace yourself. Don't rush. Let the words sit with you. The stories we're covering tonight all have one thing in common: Craigslist. That website that feels like a yard sale that never ends, where you can find a used couch, a music teacher, a job posting, a roommate, or apparently, according to everything, you're about to hear something that you were never supposed to find. Every story tonight is based on real accounts, real people, real close calls. Some names and details have been changed, but the fear in these stories is not. So take a breath, close your eyes for just a second, and when you open them, let's begin. The first one starts with an apartment listing. It was the spring of 2017, and I was 23 years old, newly relocated to a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest for a job that paid just barely enough to matter. I didn't know anyone there. I had one suitcase, a laptop, and about $400 that wasn't earmarked for something else. I'd been sleeping on an air mattress in a friend of a friend's living room for 2 weeks, which was exactly as uncomfortable and humiliating as it sounds. So when I found the listing on Craigslist, a furnished room in a house near the transit line, utilities included, $600 a month, I felt the kind of relief that makes your whole body loosen at once. The listing had 4 photos. The room itself was small but clean, white walls, a bed with a simple blue comforter, a window that faced a small backyard with overgrown grass, and a wooden fence. It looked like the room of someone who had just moved out cleanly and left things neat. The kitchen photo showed a normal kitchen. Normal counters, normal refrigerator with a magnet or two, a window above the sink with afternoon light coming through. There was a living room photo, a couch, a television on a stand, a floor lamp. Nothing fancy, nothing alarming. The 4th photo was just of the front porch, a wooden porch with 2 chairs on it and a potted plant that had seen better days. I emailed the listing that same night. The reply came in less than 10 minutes. The landlord, he gave his name as Gerald, wrote in short, choppy sentences. Room is available. Can show you Saturday. Bring ID. No pets. No smoking. There was a phone number at the bottom. I wrote back immediately and confirmed Saturday. I should tell you that I noticed the response time. 10 minutes is fast. Unusually fast for a Craigslist listing at 9:30 at night. I noticed it, and I filed it away somewhere in the back of my mind, under things that are probably nothing, and I moved on. Saturday came. I took the bus because I didn't have a car yet. The address put me in a neighborhood that I can only describe as transitional, the kind of block that has one really well-maintained house on it, 2 that are clearly rentals, 1 that has a foreclosure notice on the door, and then everything in between. The house I was looking at was somewhere in the middle, gray paint that had faded unevenly, a front yard that was mowed but not landscaped, blinds in every window, all of them closed. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at it. My stomach did something small and quiet, not a lurch, nothing dramatic, just a tightening. The kind of thing you might dismiss as nerves about a new place, which is exactly what I told myself it was. I knocked. Gerald answered after a long pause. He was older than I had imagined, somewhere in his mid-60s, I guessed, with white hair combed neatly to the side and pale blue eyes that were alert in a way that felt less like intelligence and more like watchfulness. He was wearing a button-down shirt that was buttoned all the way to the top. He looked at me for a full 2 or 3 seconds before he spoke. "You're the one who emailed," he said. "Not a question." "Yeah, yes. That's me." He stepped aside and let me in. The inside of the house was colder than outside. Not dramatically cold, but noticeably so, the way a basement is colder than the rest of a house. It smelled like old paper and something faintly chemical underneath, like a cleaning product used heavily and recently. The living room matched the photo couch, television, lamp, but in person, it felt different. The furniture was arranged in a way that seemed off, like it had been placed by someone who had seen photographs of living rooms but never actually lived in one. The couch faced the wall rather than the television. The lamp was in the corner farthest from the couch. It all felt just slightly wrong, the way a dream version of a normal place feels wrong, even when you can't identify why. Gerald showed me the kitchen, the bathroom, and then the room itself. He stood in the doorway while I looked around, and I noticed that he didn't come fully inside the room with me. He stayed at the threshold and watched from there. When I turned to ask about the lease, he was already watching my face, not the room, not his phone, watching my face. "How long you planning to stay?" he asked. I said I wasn't sure, maybe 6 months, maybe longer if things went well. He nodded slowly. "The last tenant stayed 14 months, he said. He said it the way Yao'd say something that just occurred to you, casual, conversational. And then he added, without any particular emphasis, "She left quick." I asked what he meant. "She got a new job," he said. "Had to go." We stood in the doorway for a moment. He was looking at me steadily. I was trying to read the room, trying to decide if this man was just socially awkward, which plenty of people are, especially older people who've lived alone, or if there was something else here that I was not correctly identifying. I thanked him for the showing and told him I'd be in touch. He walked me to the door and stood there as I went down the porch steps. I could feel him watching me go. I did not look back. I walked to the corner, turned, and then I did look back. He was still in the doorway, still watching. I didn't take the room. I told myself it was because I found something better, which I eventually did. But the truth is, I went home that night and I sat on that air mattress in my friend's living room, and I looked up the address online. I found the property records. The house had been owned by Gerald for 11 years. In those 11 years, I found 3 different court documents involving the property. One was a nuisance complaint from a neighbor. One was a small claims case that had been dismissed. The third was a restraining order filed by a woman. The name on the order was a woman's name I didn't recognize, and the case was dated about 16 months prior. 14 months, Gerald had said. She left quick. I never went back. I never emailed him again. And I never found out what actually happened in that house, if anything, if everything. Some doors you leave closed, some listings you walk away from, and you count yourself lucky for having walked away at all. That story stayed with me for a long time, mostly because nothing overtly terrible happened. It's the stories where nothing specific occurs that tend to haunt me the most, because your mind fills in the space with everything it can imagine. The next one is different. The next one is the kind where the terrible thing happens quickly, without much warning, and the warning that was there came too late. Her name was Mara. She told me this story herself, sitting at a kitchen table in a city I won't name, drinking coffee that had gone cold while she talked. She's fine now. She wants that said up front, she is fine now. But she also said that fine now and unchanged are not the same thing. Mara was 26 when she started selling things on Craigslist. She'd moved out of her boyfriend's place and was living in a studio apartment that barely fit her, and she needed cash. She sold a futon, a bicycle, a microwave, some books. Small transactions, nothing unusual, the kind of Craigslist interactions that happen thousands of times a day across the country. A person arrives, they look at the thing, they hand over cash, they leave. The man who answered her listing for a vintage dresser seemed completely normal. He messaged through the Craigslist relay, which she appreciated because it kept her real email private. He asked a few questions: dimensions, condition of the drawers, whether the mirror was intact. Normal questions. She answered them. He said he wanted it and could come Saturday morning. She confirmed the address and the time. Saturday came. He arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. She noticed the punctuality, which she thought was a good sign. He was, and she described him very carefully to me, exactly the kind of person you don't think twice about. Average height, brown jacket, maybe 40 years old, maybe younger. the kind of face that doesn't anchor itself in memory. He looked at the dresser, opened the drawers, ran his hand along the mirror frame, said it looked great, counted out the cash in small bills, and then he asked if she could help him carry it to his truck. This is the part. This is the exact point in the story where I want you to hear something clearly. She said yes, and I want to be careful here about how I say what I am about to say, because Mara herself is very clear on this point. What happened was not her fault. Helping someone carry furniture you're selling them is a completely normal thing to do. It is not reckless. It is not naive. It is just a thing people do. The predatory aspect of what he was about to do relied entirely on the normalcy of that moment, which is what made it so hard to see coming. They carried the dresser out to the hallway together. He propped it against the wall and said he needed to pull his truck around closer. He went outside. She waited in the hallway. He was gone for a few minutes. She stood there in the hallway, and she told me she noticed that she was very aware of the fact that her apartment door was behind her and the front door of the building was in front of her, and she was alone in the hallway, and she couldn't see the street from where she was standing. She noticed this clearly, and she told herself it was fine. When he came back in, he was not alone. There was a second man behind him, bigger than the first. She had never seen him before. He had not been at the truck. She had seen the truck through her apartment window before she came downstairs, and there had been no one in it. She said later that she thinks he was waiting somewhere else. She thinks the second man was in position somewhere behind the building, around the corner, and that the truck pull around was the signal. She looked at the first man. She looked at the second man, and she said something changed in her immediately, something primal and fast and absolutely right. She did not wait for them to say anything. She did not think it through. She turned and walked fast, but not running, because running would have made them move faster too back to her apartment door. She got inside. She turned the deadbolt. She slid the chain. She went to her bathroom, which had no windows, and she sat on the floor and she called 911. The police came. By the time they arrived, the men were gone. The dresser was still in the hallway. The cash had been left on her kitchen table. He had set it down before they went to carry the dresser, and she had not thought to take it with her in those moments of escape. The police took the account. They did not find the men. Mara moved out of that apartment within a month. She meets buyers in public places now, parking lots, coffee shops, the front of police stations where some cities allow exactly this. She never meets anyone alone in a private space. Not anymore. She told me that the thing she thinks about most is not the two men, not the moment of turning back. The thing she thinks about most is the moment in the hallway before he came back, when she noticed that she was alone and told herself it was fine. She said that her gut knew before the second man appeared. Her gut was already sending the signal, and she almost overrode it. She said, "Don't override it. Whatever signal your body sends, don't you dare override it." I think about what Mara said every time I go into a situation that feels slightly wrong, in a way I can't articulate. There's a reason the body knows things before the brain does. Evolution is not subtle. Your nervous system was built by 10,000 years of threat survival, and it has opinions that are worth listening to. The next story involves someone who listened early enough, and I want you to hear how close it still was. This one happened in a different city, a college town in the Midwest, and the person it happened to called Daniel. Daniel was 21, a junior, and he was looking for a used car because his old one had finally given out, and he needed something, anything, that would get him to his internship and back. He found a listing for a 2009 Honda Civic, 88,000 miles, no accidents, needs a small brake job, asking $3,000. The photos showed a blue car in decent shape. The listing had a phone number. Daniel texted the number. The reply was fast, friendly. The seller, who gave a name that sounded ordinary, her first name, only said the car was great. He was just selling because had gotten a company car through his new job. He said Daniel was welcome to take it for a test drive and that he lived in Millbrook, which Daniel knew as a suburb about 20 minutes outside the city. They agreed to meet on a Thursday evening at 6:30. Now here is where the slow burn of this story begins, and I want you to stay with me in it. Daniel drove out to Millbrook. The address was on a residential street, a real street, a normal-looking street, not somewhere isolated. But when he pulled up, the house sat at the end of a long driveway, and the back of the property butted up against what looked like a tree line. You couldn't see the house clearly from the road. He noted this without alarm. Lots of suburban houses are set back from the road. The seller met him in the driveway. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, maybe 45, wearing a fleece vest. He had an easy smile and a confident handshake. The car was right there in the driveway. It looked fine. Not great, not terrible. Fine. They walked around it together. The seller pointed out the small scrape on the rear bumper, mentioned it before Daniel had a chance to ask about it, which Daniel noted as a good sign of transparency. He opened the hood, showed Daniel the engine, showed him the service records he had kept in a folder in the glove compartment. He had a folder with service records in a clear plastic sleeve. This is important because the folder was part of what delayed Daniel's alarm. The seller suggested they take it for a test drive. He said head right along, which is completely normal. Daniel got in the driver's seat. The seller got in the passenger seat. They drove down the long driveway, turned onto the residential street, and the seller suggested turning right at the next intersection, which would take them toward the highway ramp. Daniel turned right, and as they were turning, Daniel's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He didn't look at it immediately. They drove for a minute. The seller was talking about the car, about the highway miles, about how it handled. He was saying all the right things. And then Daniel's phone buzzed again. He said, "Excuse me 1 second," and glanced at the screen. It was a text from his roommate, who had been the only person who knew where Daniel was going that evening. The text said, "Hey, did you find the car okay? Send me your location just in case." And Daniel looked at the text, and then he looked at the road ahead of him. They were approaching the highway ramp now. And past the highway ramp there was nothing but a long stretch of empty interstate and flat farmland on both sides, and something in him shifted. He said it wasn't one thing. He said it was the sum of things. The driveway, the tree line, the isolated house, the way the seller had been so quick to establish normalcy, the service record folder in the glove compartment, the eerie thoroughness of the presentation, the highway ramp ahead, the empty road beyond it, the roommate's text. His heart was beating harder now, and he recognized the feeling not as fear exactly, but as the place just before fear, the last clear moment before alarm takes over. He pulled off the road before the ramp. He said his stomach felt wrong. He thought he might be getting sick. He was sorry. He needed to head back. He told me the seller's expression changed, just for a moment, a flicker, something behind the easy smile, something that went briefly flat and cold. And then the smile returned, and the seller said, "Of course, no problem. These things happen." They drove back. Daniel said the drive back was the longest 10 minutes of his life, sitting in a small enclosed space with this man whose expression had done that thing, that brief terrible thing, and not being able to go faster or get out. He returned the car. He shook the man's hand. He drove home. He found his roommate in the living room, and he sat down and told the whole story. And then he just sat there in silence for a long time. Later that night, he looked up the address on a county property site. The property was not registered in any name that matched the first name the seller had given. The property had no clear individual ownership. It was registered to an LLC. The LLC had no public-facing information. He reported it to the non-emergency police line. He doesn't know if anything came of it. He drove home. He sat with his roommate. And for months after that, he took a different route home in the evenings, without quite understanding why. He never went to look at another Craigslist car without a second person in the car with him. He never went anywhere alone that he had found through a stranger's listing. He told me the folder is what gets him. He said, "Someone who has normal reasons to sell a car doesn't build a whole performance around reassuring you. Normal people are sloppy and distracted. That folder was for me. That folder was a prop. I think about that a lot. The folder was a prop. Some Craigslist horror is the obvious kind, the meeting a stranger kind, the alone in a house kind. But some of it is slower. Some of it happens over weeks, and you don't realize you're in something terrible until you're deep inside it and looking for a way out. This next story is that kind. A woman ill called Lee was 34 and newly divorced when she posted on Craigslist looking for work. This was about 2015. She had been out of the workforce for several years. She had been raising her kids and managing the house while her husband worked, and now she was facing re-entry into a job market that felt foreign and intimidating. She was qualified. She had a degree. She had skills. But she was out of practice and out of confidence, and in that state of vulnerability, she found a listing that seemed tailor-made for someone in her exact situation. The listing was for a part-time administrative assistant position. Work from home, flexible hours, could accommodate a parent's schedule. The pay was stated clearly $18 an hour, which wasn't remarkable, but was fair for the work described. The job responsibilities sounded genuine. Scheduling, light correspondence, organizing files for a small business owner. She applied through the Craigslist relay with her resume. The reply came the next morning from a man who signed his name as Philip. He thanked her for her interest, said she was an excellent candidate, and asked if she could do a phone interview. The phone interview was charming. Philip was warm, articulate, easy to talk to. He asked thoughtful questions about her background. He explained the business. He described himself as an independent consultant who traveled frequently and needed reliable back-end support. He was complimentary about her experience. He said he'd like to move forward and asked if they could meet to go over the contract. They met at a coffee shop. This detail is important. They met in public, in a coffee shop, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. And Philip was everything he had sounded like on the phone. Professional, friendly, well-dressed. He had a laptop with him, and he showed her the business website, which looked real and polished. He had a printed contract that was several pages long and looked legitimate. He explained her duties. He gave her an onboarding timeline. He mentioned that several other assistants had worked for him and had great experiences. He had references. She signed the contract. For the first 2 weeks, everything was fine. She scheduled his calls, sent correspondence, organized his digital files. He was responsive and professional. He paid her on time for the first week, exactly as agreed. At the start of the third week, things began to shift in a way that was hard to name. He started emailing after 10 at night. The emails were work-related, but they had a different tone, more personal, more chatty. He would ask about her day, mention things she had told him about herself during the interview. He started addressing her with a familiarity that she found slightly uncomfortable. He started calling her Lee Girl, which was not something she had invited or responded to positively, but which she didn't directly address because it felt small, like maybe she was reading too much into it. Then he asked her to handle something new. He asked her to purchase gift cards on his behalf. He said he had a vendor he paid in gift cards. He described it as a quirk of an overseas business relationship, and he needed her to buy $500 in gift cards and send him the codes. This should have been the moment she stopped everything, and she almost did stop. She told me that she felt wrong about it immediately. She actually put down her phone and didn't respond for an hour. And then she went back and looked at the contract, which said that she was authorized to make purchases on his behalf up to a certain limit, which this was under. And she told herself that unusual payment arrangements exist in legitimate business. And she went and bought the gift cards. She sent him the codes. He thanked her and said he'd add it to her next paycheck as a reimbursable expense. He didn't add it to her next paycheck. He shorted her by the $500. When she asked about it, he apologized. He said it had been an accounting error. He'd correct it the following week. But there was something in his tone that was different, less warm, clipped. The following week she got a partial correction, $250. And then came a second request for gift cards. She said no. She said it clearly in writing. He responded with a long email that she described as unsettling. It wasn't angry. It wasn't threatening. It was just strange. He talked about how much he valued her, how he had chosen her specifically because she was capable and trustworthy, how he felt like they had built a real professional relationship, and how he was disappointed that she was being difficult about a minor business request. The language was almost manipulative in its softness. He never raised his voice. He just kept pressing in calm, careful words. She told a friend about it. The friend looked it up. The gift card scheme is one of the most common iterations of a type of fraud sometimes called the overpayment scam or the job scam. A fake employer establishes enough credibility to extract money from the person they've hired under a series of increasingly large or frequent requests. Sometimes it starts with gift cards. Sometimes it escalates to wire transfers. The business website Lee had been shown was not real. It had been registered just 2 months before her interview and had no history, no reviews, no external presence on any professional network. The man she knew as Philip was not his real name. She had lost $500. She reported it to the FTC. The business vanished from the web within weeks of her report. But there's something about this story that goes beyond the financial loss, and Leah said it to me very directly. She said the worst part was not the money. The worst part was how carefully she'd been chosen. The posting had not been generic. It had specifically described a situation that matched hers: parent-friendly hours, work from home, re-entering the workforce. She had been targeted not randomly but with a profile in mind. And she said, and I've thought about this every time I've heard a similar story since, she said, I was looking for something to believe in, and someone used that against me. That's the cruelest kind of predation, not the physical kind, the kind that finds you at your most hopeful and turns that against you. There's a version of Craigslist horror that lives in the middle of the night and involves nothing more than a stranger knowing your address. This next story is that kind. His name is Tamaz, and he was 27 when this happened, renting a 1-bedroom apartment in a city he'd just moved to for graduate school. He had been in the apartment for about 3 months. He was still getting used to the neighborhood, still learning which streets were busy, which were quiet, which felt right at night. He listed a pair of speakers on Craigslist. Good speakers, not audiophile level but well above average, the kind of thing a music person would want, in good condition, asking $150. He got several responses. One of them stood out slightly because the person who gave the name Ray asked very specific questions about the speakers, technical questions. What was the impedance? What amplifier had he been running them through? Was there any distortion at high volume? These were the questions of someone who knew what they were talking about. Tamaz liked this. He liked talking about audio equipment with someone who understood it. They went back and forth for a bit, and it was actually a pleasant exchange, and they agreed that Ray would come by Saturday afternoon to look at the speakers. Saturday afternoon came, and nobody showed up. Tamaz waited 30 minutes past the agreed time, and then texted Ray to ask if everything was okay. No response. He waited another 20 minutes, and then assumed the deal had fallen through. This happens. He wasn't annoyed about it. He put the speakers back in the corner and made dinner. He didn't hear from Ray again until 2 weeks later. Ray sent a message through Craigslist apologizing something had come up. He still wanted the speakers. Could they try again? Tamaz said sure, named a new time. Ray confirmed. Again no show. At this point, if I'm being honest, I would have just blocked the contact. But Tamaz is a patient person, and had a pleasant conversation with this guy, and he told himself Ray was just flaky. Third time they confirmed. Ray asked if he could come on a Tuesday evening instead of a weekend because of his work schedule. Tamaz said that was fine. Tuesday evening, 8 o'clock. Tamaz was home, waiting. 8 o'clock came and went. At 8:15, there was a knock at the door. Not a buzzer from the building entrance. A knock at his actual apartment door, which meant that whoever was at the door had already gotten through the building's front entrance, which required a key or a buzzer code. Tamaz went to his door and looked through the peephole. There was a man in the hallway. He didn't recognize him. He was holding a phone to his ear, and as Tamaz watched him, the man lowered the phone and knocked again. Tamaz called out through the door. "Who's there?" "Ray," the man said. "For the speakers. Now here's the thing." Tamaz had never been asked for a buzzer code, and he had never given one. His building had a buzzer panel at the front entrance where visitors could ring individual apartments. If Ray had buzzed from outside, Tamaz would have had to let him in. He had not let anyone in that evening. He asked through the door, "How did you get in?" The man paused. "Someone was leaving as I came in. This is possible. This happens. People sometimes hold the door for strangers." But Tamaz stood at his peephole and looked at this man in his hallway. and something was wrong. He couldn't identify exactly what it was at first, maybe the timing, maybe the no-shows before this, maybe just the texture of a stranger's face outside his door at 8:15 at night. But something was wrong. He told the man through the door that had changed his mind. The speakers weren't for sale anymore. There was a silence of several seconds. I came all the way across town, the man said. Tamaz said he was sorry. He should have messaged. The speakers were already gone. Another silence. Then, can I at least see them? To know what I am missing. That sentence. Can I at least see them? To know what I am missing. Tamaz said no, and he went to his kitchen, and he found the largest item within arms, reach a cast iron pan. And he stood by the door, and he listened. He heard footsteps in the hallway for a while. He didn't know if the man was standing there, or walking around, or what he was doing. He listened for 15 minutes, before he heard the sound of the stairwell door opening and footsteps going down. He waited another 20 minutes before he did anything else. He messaged the Craigslist relay account to say the item was sold. He got no reply. 3 days later, at 2:30 in the morning, someone tried his apartment door handle. He was awake. He barely slept that whole week, actually. He heard the handle depress and release, then silence. In the morning, he reported it to his building manager, who looked at the hallway camera footage. There was footage of a man in the hallway at 2:29 a.m. The quality wasn't great. You could see a figure, not a face. The police were not much help. Nothing had technically happened. Nothing had been stolen or damaged. No explicit threat had been made. He was told to change his locks, which he did, and to report any further incidents. He never listed anything on Craigslist again. He moved apartments the following semester, partly for unrelated reasons, and partly for reasons that were entirely related to this. He told me, I still don't know who that man was, or what he wanted, and I've had to accept that I am never going to know, and somehow that not knowing is its own particular kind of fear, because when you don't know, your brain invents possibilities, and some of those possibilities are the kind that live behind your eyes when you're trying to sleep at 2 in the morning, and you're listening, really listening to every sound in the building. He said, I listen now. I never used to listen. I listen now. The last story I want to tell you tonight is mine. I don't usually do this. Usually I stay on the other side of these stories. I collect them. I tell them. I try to do justice to the people who lived through them. But this one is mine, and I think after everything you've heard tonight, it deserves to be said out loud. It was a few years ago. I was living alone, which I had done for a long time, and had become comfortable with. I am someone who genuinely enjoys solitude. I go to bed late. I wake up early. I keep my own quiet rhythms. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up building, with a door that opened directly onto a stairwell that served only my floor and the one below. There were 4 units on my floor, but at the time 2 of them were vacant, and the 3rd was occupied by an older couple who traveled frequently. I was often alone on that floor. I listed a bookshelf on Craigslist. Large, solid wood, 6 shelves, the kind that's almost too heavy to move, but absolutely worth it if you have books. I had too many books, and not enough wall space, and I was letting it go with some reluctance. The person who answered was a woman. She introduced herself as Elena, said she'd been looking for exactly this kind of shelf for her study, said she had a car and could pick it up herself with help from her husband. We exchanged a couple of messages. She was warm and specific. She asked the exact dimensions, asked if the finish had any damage, mentioned that she was redecorating, and this was the last piece she needed. I liked her. She felt real in the way that most people are real when they are buying a used bookshelf. She said they could come Thursday evening. I said Thursday worked. I gave her my address. Thursday evening came. I made the apartment presentable, moved the bookshelf away from the wall, cleared a path to the door. 6 o'clock, when they said they'd arrive, came and went. 6:15, 6:30. I sent a message. No reply. I assumed they'd bailed. It was a little frustrating but not alarming. I pushed the shelf back against the wall and started cooking dinner. At 7:15, my buzzer rang. I buzzed them in without thinking much of it. I had been expecting them. They were just late. I assumed something had come up on their end. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and then a knock at my door. I opened the door. It was Elena. She was alone. Not Elena and her husband, whom she had specifically mentioned, the husband with the car, the husband who was going to help carry. Just Elena. She was smiling. She looked exactly like I imagine someone who buys furniture on Craigslist looks. Regular clothes, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, warm expression. Nothing about her appearance was alarming. I said, "Is your husband parking?" She said, "Oh, he couldn't make it. I figured I could manage." I said, "The shelf is pretty heavy to carry alone." She said, "I'll figure it out. Can I see it?" I stepped back and let her in. We walked to where the shelf was. She looked at it and made appreciative noises, ran her hand along the wood, examined the shelves. All of this was normal. All of this was fine. And then she turned around and looked at my apartment, not at the shelf, at the apartment. She was looking at the layout. I noticed it clearly. She looked toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. She turned slightly toward the kitchen. She turned back and looked at the front door, which I had left open behind us, just ajar, not closed. And then she looked at me. I need to be precise here. She was smiling. Her expression was pleasant. What I noticed was not her expression but her eyes, which were moving with a specific quality, not curiosity, not the casual looking around of a stranger in a new space, but something more deliberate, more cataloging. I said, "So, do you still want it?" She said, "I need to think about whether I can fit it in the car." I said, "You don't have a car here?" She said, "I took a cab. My husband has the car." I stood there for a moment. I was doing math. She had told me she was coming with her husband who had a car. She was here without her husband, without a car, for a piece of furniture she could not possibly take home without both. And she had been here for several minutes, and she had not looked much at the shelf. She had looked at the apartment. I said, "I think this might not work for your space after all." She looked at me again with that smile. "Can I take some measurements just to be sure?" I said, "I don't have a tape measure handy. I'm actually running late for something. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience." There was a pause that lasted a few seconds too long. She said, "Okay." She picked up her canvas tote. She walked to the front door. I followed because I was not willing to be behind her in my own apartment. She left. I locked the door. I put the chain on. I sat down on my couch and I stayed there for a long time in the dark, not moving, just listening to the stairwell sounds and telling myself that there was probably a perfectly normal explanation for all of it. I never found out what she wanted. I never heard from her again. I took the Craigslist listing down that night and I donated the shelf to a thrift store by leaving it in front of my building with a free sign on it. But here's the thing about that night that has stayed with me in a way the others haven't. I had let her in. She had been in my apartment. She had seen the layout, the lock, the hallway, the way the front door sat ajar if you didn't pull it fully closed. She had been inside my space, and she had looked at it with those deliberate eyes. And then she had left, and I was alone on a floor where no one else lived, and all I had between me and the rest of the world was a door and a chain lock. I moved my bed against the wall that faces the stairwell that night. I don't know why. It just felt like something I needed to do. I didn't sleep well for weeks. Every sound on the stairs, every slow footstep, every creak that buildings make at 3 in the morning when you are awake and listening, and the night is very still. I still use Craigslist sometimes. I think most of us do. The world runs on these small exchanges between strangers, these small acts of trust. I have something. You need something. Let's meet in the middle. And the vast majority of the time, that's all it is, a transaction. A stranger becomes just another face in the city, someone you sold a lamp to, someone who helped you carry a table down 3 flights of stairs. But there are the other times, and they are real, and they happen more than we like to think, and the people they happen to are not reckless people or careless people. They are normal people. They are people like you, like me. People who woke up that morning thinking about groceries or work or what they'd make for dinner, and then logged onto a website and clicked a listing and stepped into something they could not have predicted. What those stories share, and I hope this is what you carry with you tonight, is not fear of strangers as a category, not a lesson about avoiding people or closing yourself off. The lesson in all of them is something quieter and more specific. It's about listening. It's about the small signals your body sends before your brain catches up, the slight tightening in the stomach, the quality of a stranger's eyes when they look at something they shouldn't be looking at, the pause that lasts one beat too long, the feeling, clear and physical and almost below language, that something is not quite right. Every person in these stories had that feeling. Some of them acted on it in time, some of them barely did. And the ones who came through are the ones who trusted themselves, who chose the minor awkwardness of saying no over the catastrophic risk of saying yes when everything inside them was pointing elsewhere. This world is full of doors you don't have to open. Not every knock demands an answer. Not every listing is what it says it is. Not every stranger who smiles at you wishes you well. Close your eyes now if you want. The night is quiet where you are. You're safe. You're in your space, your familiar space, with all the things you know around you, the sound of the building settling, the particular dark behind your eyelids, the feeling of the pillow under your head. But somewhere right now, in a city you've never been to, in a hallway you'll never see, someone is looking through a peephole at a stranger who knocked without being buzzed. Someone is sitting very still on a bed they've pushed against the wall, listening to footsteps on the stairs. Someone is holding a phone in the dark, rereading a message they should never have answered. The world is full of doors. And tonight, at least, you didn't open the wrong one. Sleep well, if you can.